Welcome to the Talent Report Plus Thrive podcast, where we dive deep into the ever-evolving topic of talent with insights from MRA members. I'm your host, Jim Morgan, Vice President of Workforce Strategies at MRA, and I'm thrilled to guide you through these conversations with our MRA members who are industry experts, thought leaders, and passionate professionals at the forefront of talent development.
So on the succession planning, I'm going to ask my two guests to introduce themselves in just a minute when they answer this first question. But to give you a little bit on the trend of what we're seeing here right now, and that is succession planning used to be this thing that was out here someplace, and we did it for a couple of people, and we had a succession plan for our CEO and our CFO, and it may not have gone any further than that. Now people are looking at it a little bit more holistically as they try to figure out who do we need a succession plan for? Because it's not just those 4 people at the top, it's those 3 key managers. It's that person that's on the factory floor who knows the only way to start this machine is to kick it twice, tell it you love it, hit it again and turn the key and hopefully it comes on. That's a key employee. Or the department where if you lost 3 people on the same day, it pretty well shuts down your whole place. So people are looking at this as more of a talent management strategy, and succession planning is a part of it. So I'm going to ask Elise and Mike to, one, introduce yourselves if you would, and maybe give your first reaction to that slide.
So Elise Radowitz with Velocity Leader. I definitely see similar trends that you're talking about, Jim, with like it being succession planning over here and talent management over here, and now we're looking at it holistically. It definitely was a shift that's been, I would say, probably the last, 10 years, where it was more succession planning for leadership, and people are trying to integrate that to maybe it's an emerging leader that they're a program, identifying their high potentials and moving them into an actual formalized program. It can look a little different depending on the industry and the size of the business, but I think that overall they're trying to make it a holistic thing for the company, just to, as a talent development and retention strategy, to have something behind it in terms of strategy or program.
Yeah, and I'm Mike White with Seki, and we're an employee relationship management deal. And the thing that stuck out with me in your words is keeping them separate. And what I've seen is the data has gotten easier for folks to use. So as the data gets easier and the programs get better, that we've had talent management over here and we've had the succession planning team over here, it's that it becomes easier. And the other trend that I've seen in manufacturing is the emphasis on the front lines is totally different than it was 10 years ago. So I think some of it's probably, you mentioned you were a millennial, I'm a millennial too, right on the edge, is being more, like we want a little bit more attention. As I'm generalizing generations, I know that it's sensitive, but I want more attention. Let me just say this, I want more attention. And so by giving more attention to the front lines, we've seen, I've seen basic succession plans for entry-level employees and having conversations. Okay, you're here. This is what it looks like to go into the technical engineering route. This is what it looks like to go into the leadership route or into the quality route. And we've done plans at the lower levels to address that.
Geez, we're not even like 2 minutes in, and we've got the generational stereotypes going.
I know. I caught myself.
That's okay, because I'm part of that dope-smoking, long-haired, ponytailed, never going to amount to anything baby boomers, and now we own everything. So
Yeah.
For now.
For now. And the millennials strike back.
Right.
Excellent. I'm sure both of you are going to have some comments on this. I know that a lot of people use the 9-box in the audience. Show of hands as to how many use the 9-box in evaluating your talent and looking at things. A lot of people do, and they look at, how do we go about doing this? And one of the things that we're seeing change on this a little bit is it's becoming more of a discussion. It's not, well, here's my department, I'm going to take it to HR and say, here's where I think all of my people stand. It's more of a discussion amongst folks that interact, whether that's leaders from other departments and things like that, to say, my view of my people might be, oh yeah, everybody's high performer, all my people are great, and in every organization, every manager thinks their people are all the best, they're the ones who get 6%, those other departments get none, and they're going to put them all in the upper right-hand corner. But having an opportunity to sort of challenge that a little bit and say, well, you know, my interactions with that person might be a little bit different, or I've seen this, maybe to move them up, maybe to move them down, maybe to move them over, but a lot more conversation versus just a manager saying, well, this is where they fit, and so this is what they ought to do. The second one that we're seeing a lot of conversation around is, you know, there was always this desire to, how do we get people to that upper right-hand corner? How do we push them up there? That's where they have to go. And beginning to accept some people that maybe are just really good at what they do, and they really don't want more responsibility. They don't want to do more things. They want to be really good at what they do, and we need people to do what they're doing. So rather than take someone who's really good at what they do and try to push them into probably a management position or more responsibility or more administration, let's keep them doing what they're good at, and let's have some realistic conversations around that. Now, what we do with these, and this is where I'm going to ask for your two opinion on some of this, you know, just to see, okay, so we went through all this, we put all these people in different places, we have an assessment, we know what it is, then somebody tucks the 9 box away somewhere and it's never to be seen again, versus, you know, what does that mean for leadership and development? What does that mean in what we do with that information? How does it get into our performance reviews and things like that? So I'm curious with both of you to say, you know, what do we do with this? We've done the data. Let's say we did it right. Now what happens?
Mike, go for it.
I'll go first. All right. I was thinking about how much turnover has affected this 9 block. When you're scared of losing or not when you're, because we're in HR here, because we do it right, but when your team is scared to put somebody in the top right because they know they could leave and they're talented, and our view of like retention has changed. That's another part that, as you talk about succession planning and talent management, is we're trying to bring in new ideas into the organization. We're trying to change things. It's helpful to get somebody from the outside. But when you put somebody in that star performer and they leave, that's a reflection on you. So I like to think about what the motivation is behind the leadership as they play this out. And I am an advocate. I had a person I work with that says, we need all A players. And I'm like, have you ever been on a team with all A players? It starts with an A for a reason. Like a lot of times the A players can be very tough and driven, and when you need the middle block. You absolutely need the middle block for consistency. And so I think there's a couple things that I've seen with a recent company I worked with is the middle block shouldn't hurt people's feelings. And as a company culture, we have to work on that messaging when it gets rolled out. And then the other part of it is making sure leaders don't feel like there's retribution if you get it wrong. Because we do get it wrong, and people change throughout the year. So those things are what I've seen quite a bit of.
So you talked about the evolution of people, or like the changing of perception potentially on people not wanting to be in management roles. I've seen that a lot. So I work with companies in the trades. And the biggest challenge I'm hearing from leaders is, I don't have anybody that wants to be in management. And I'm like, well, why? And they're like, they're good. They're good, solid performers. They don't want the extra responsibility. They don't want the extra headaches of managing people. Adult babysitting, I've heard that term several times. Part of it is what are we modeling as leaders too, of what leadership looks like? What does management look like? To your point, Mike, of like, why do they want it? What's your motivation to go into a leadership role? Because sometimes we put people in positions based on their performance, and we assume that naturally you're going to want to lead people. They might not want to. So starting that conversation, even at the beginning of like when the employee first gets into the organization, ask them what their career aspirations are. And they might change, and that's okay, but having that conversation be part of more than just an annual conversation. A couple of the companies I've worked with have used EOS, and that framework is really helpful to have quarterly conversations. So it's not just an annual review. I know that annual reviews are kind of going by the wayside, but making the career path conversation just that, a conversation. Here's where I see you, where do you see you, here's where the company's going, here's where I could see you fit. I've had that conversation with people I've managed and people that have managed me. Well, I can see you in a couple different lanes. Like, what do you like about operations? What do you like about sales or store management, something like that, depending on the role. But It's not one size fits all, but figuring out what it is for them and what that means, kind of find a shared definition. Because if you have different vision of where that person's going to be, that's probably not going to end up real well.
Yeah, and I've seen that too. And the other thing popped into my head is the accessibility to this, and if you're going to make it easy to use, and you're having that regular conversation. When you said quarterly conversation, making it accessible is what where I see it. If you only pull it out once a year, that's when you pull it out. When you make it accessible to your team and you share it with your leadership, and you're just even bringing it up in one of your quarterly strategy meetings, like, hey, is this still good? And by making it accessible when that job comes open, we now have a list of people that we're going to ask to apply or think that would be interested in applying.
And let me hit both of you kind of in your sweet spots from an L&D point of view and from a data point of view as we're having this conversation. Are you seeing people either utilizing data in a way, Mike, that you haven't seen that happen before, or at least looking at things from a learning like, okay, and if this is where you're here and you want to get to, is there a strategy in place that ties back to this?
Yeah, there has to be a strategy in place. I mean, the talent assessment piece, I think, is a hard piece to unpack for each individual person. That's where having those KPIs, those metrics, for each kind of seat. I'm sure you probably all heard of this, but you don't create the seat for the person, you create the seat for the company. So staying true to that seat is going to be the best thing for you, and then helping that employee understand that seat, I know you may want it because the title is great or the pay is great, but these are what we need out of that role, and that may not fit your strengths real well. I mean, It's a hard conversation to have, but otherwise, you can go into pretend mode. Like, okay, say you do get this, let's play it out a year from now. This is what it would look like for you. How do you feel about that? And just because part of it is letting them decide, also letting them co-create the career path together and checking in on that. But I think to your point of bringing that to leadership, going, so this is what I'm telling them, here's what I've been messaging to my team or my individuals. Is this still kind of is this still are we on track? Is this still the roadmap, or is it shifted? It's okay, but you need to know as a leader to let them know. I always use the analogy of the plane. Okay, I'm in the cockpit and the employees are in the back. I can see clear skies ahead, but if they're going to experience turbulence, I got to tell them up front, we're not going to crash, it'll be okay. But trust me as your leader that I know it's coming, but it's going to be bumpy. And it may not be there in the time frame that you want it to be either, which is also a conversation to have too on timing.
Yeah, I have a personal story on that. There was a reorganization, and I didn't even get an interview for a senior VP role. And I called my manager, a good relationship, and I'm an operations person, so I'm pretty direct. And I'm like, what's going on? This other person got it. You didn't even talk to me. And I had a beer with her last night, and I reminded her of this conversation. And she goes, Mike, you told me 2 weeks ago you didn't want to travel. This job's all travel. And I took a step back and said, in my driven mind, I want to be in that top right for probably some emotional trauma or something. I don't know.
Or you're on stage now. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm on stage. Yeah, I love these lights. So I want to be in that top right, but the reality is there's going to be seasons where I'm a core player, and that was a huge learning, and I absolutely love this person for telling me that. And then from a technology data standpoint, you all have the tools. What I have found is, all the systems have it, right? Workday, ADP, UKG, they all have it. We don't really use it because it's too hard to use. The reality is there's probably some bolt-ons that are filling that gap. If this is really important to you, find the bolt-on software that can connect in and use that. But the data that I've seen that's been so helpful is the Tableau. I'm recalling a visual Tableau chart that could take that raw data and make it visually appealing for your HR team. And I just talked about find your friend. Find the friend that's trustworthy enough to see that HR data. When you run it in rows, they can make it nice and pretty for you. If that's not you, if it's you, make it nice and pretty. But by getting the data accessible, data democracy, that's where it becomes more impactful.
And then you can tailor learning around that to fill the gaps to get them where they want to be.
Right.
You two ought to go into business.
Yeah, we just met too, like a high fiver.
On the emerging leaders one, I had a chance to talk to at least a little bit about this before we came out. But we've been spending a lot of time as companies are trying to figure out what to do with the emerging leaders, with the younger folks coming up. In a lot of cases, they're having to take over at 30 or 35, where, my generation, we might have been 50 by the time we were thrown into some of those roles. And so everybody's trying to figure out what do we do with them? How do we train them? And as part of the retention, how do we give them some sort of roadmap that says, yep, we want you here, we care about you, and here's what we need to do. At the same time, not hacking off all of the people that have been there for 10 years and are wondering, where's my program? Shouldn't this be a leaders program, not just an emerging leaders program? And so what do we do with that? And so we've been talking to a lot of our members, and we kind of came up with this series of questions almost that we were asking them, and it kind of goes like, so do you have some emerging leaders here? Yes, we do. Do they know? No, we're not going to tell them. All right, well, if you did tell them, is there a plan in place for them in terms of how they're going to grow and what the development is? We're thinking about that, but we haven't quite figured it out yet. Oh, how come? Well, we're not even sure what the criteria really is. We just kind of, 6 of us sit around and say, yep, that's an emerging leader, that's an emerging leader. And we kind of go through these series of questions where I think intrinsically they know we have to put something in place here so that when we have our upper right-hand people or our middle box people, that they know that we're trying to continue to develop them and put together a leadership program for them. And so we go through these series of questions, and then it's sort of like, okay, we do need some help. We've got to put something together. And so how many of you here, at least in the room with a show of hands, have some sort of emerging leader program? How many of you are thinking about having one? Okay. All right, we're going after the thinkers, so we can have at it. So are you seeing this same type of thing where people know that this is something that they need to do, but haven't really thought it through? Because what our initial reaction is, that sounds really good. We should have an emerging leaders program. Yeah. But then when you start saying, what's the criteria? What's the training? What does it mean? If I'm in a roundtable with CEOs, their first question is always, well, I'm not guaranteeing them that they're getting that next job. Mm-hmm. And the smarter, I think, more long-term ones have sort of looked at it like, I'm not going to guarantee you a position, but I will tell you as a company, we are going to prepare you to be ready for that position as best we can. And so those are the tough conversations I think people have. So I'm curious, as you're seeing emerging leader programs and what's happening, are you seeing these questions? And if so, how are you helping people? And who's doing it right?
This conversation comes up all the time. I mean, about if we're not talking about middle managers and what we're doing there, if they're good, usually they're like, okay, but we need to figure out who's next in line, right? Like who's next on the bench. The trickiest part with emerging leaders program is, to your point, like what's the strategy? What's the end goal? What do you want that? So that's the way I think about it, is I ask the questions like, okay, when you define, first it's by defining what an emerging leader is, because there's some differing definitions on that. So I want to understand how the organization defines an emerging leader. And then, okay, so fast forward, when you have someone graduate, what does that emerging leader look like? What do you want that skill set or competency to be? And really, it's also getting them an exposure to the entire business itself. Before it was kind of like, I'm going to move this person up in this particular kind of functional area. Well, what we're seeing is the more you can expose this person to the functional groups in the company, the more successful they're going to be. They're also going to understand a little bit more. It kind of builds on the empathy piece, right? With like, well, now I understand if I'm in marketing, I'm going to have a natural tendency to have a friction point with sales. I know it's weird, but same thing with like corporate versus the field. If I can understand more of the different functional areas of the business, I'm going to have a better understanding when they come to me with a problem or an issue. I'm going to be able to see it from their point of view more. And then I'm also going to be able to make, I would think, better decisions, because I'm understanding how if I change something here, the impact it's going to have on the field or on another department. So those are the other pieces to consider, is not just building it out for that functional area or for the company values. And those are all great. Those are good things. But thinking about long-term, give them exposure to different areas of the business so that they can understand how they really need all of them to be working.
Yep.
Mike?
Yeah, I think whenever I see emerging leaders, I think, hey, recruiter, if they have a good emerging leader program, let's get them. Because I want to steal emerging leaders, and I saw it over and over again when I was at companies that did a good job of this. So if you're a recruiter in here, that's a tip. The second thing is defining the emerging leader level. So what I'm seeing is when you're talking about the trades part, I'm seeing an emphasis on that frontline leadership right now, just because that's where the turnover is and retention issues are. where the high, I'm pulling up Caterpillar terms if they're on. Yeah, the hypos were like the salaried and the development programs were different. So back to the point on goals is setting up the goals. Are your emerging leaders that, hey, I just need to get a taste of leadership because you might like it? Or is it, I know you're going to be, I'm going to bring in several folks that have 4.0s and 3.5 GPAs, and I'm training them on the business. I see the trend of segmenting that out. And I like the idea of emerging leaders as well. As the great part about everybody that I've known in emerging leadership is they think they have the right answer when they come into the program just about every time, because that's where the ego gets crushed. So to your point on the letting the pilot know that this is going to be rough, leadership is a lot of wrong turns, and before you become good. And to me, it doesn't matter how good the training is; you just got to make those bumps. And yeah, that's how I'd break it up and define the level of leadership where the need is in the business.
And having a coach or a piece of that, like a mentor piece, I've done that with a lot of programs that I've created, is having that mentor to be there, because you're going to stumble and you don't want to necessarily do it on a stage, but you're kind of always on a stage. People are always watching. So if you can have someone along with you for whatever that duration of that program is, sometimes we've rotated them off. Sometimes they've been with the same mentor, someone else in senior leadership, or maybe a different functional area. And that's super helpful.
And not giving up on it. Literally, one of the, I consider him one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And he's the person that, he goes, I know what you're thinking when you made that decision. And I was like, what? And he gave me the whole analysis of what I was thinking. I was like, Matthew, I wasn't even thinking. I just like randomly made that decision because I had too many decisions that day. And that guy right now is like running a huge business. He almost got ran out of the company in a 6-month rotation as a frontline leader. And I think that is part of the program, as you think about trends, is understanding these are meant to teach people, like give them a little safety in making mistakes.
Good point.
All right, thank you both. I've lost control.
I've lost control.
I'm getting comfortable now.
Yeah, we're all good.
Yeah.
The next slide that I've got, if you can sort of just imagine in your head, is like the career ladder. There it is. You know, the traditional, my generation, we're going to go up. I'm going to step here, step here, step here. I'll go from, manager to director to assistant vice president to senior vice president. That's the way we do it. That's how we do it. To now where you're seeing more of this, career lattice is the term that I've heard with it most often. But companies really trying to get their, especially new employees, really get the business acumen to don't just stay in your one little lane and go right up to the top. Stay with things in terms of, I want you to know this, and I want you to know this, and I want you to know this, and kind of move it around a little bit. And companies actually putting in place rotations, if you will, that says, here's what we want to do. And I think with the long game of simply saying, we'd rather have people go from Department A to Department B than from Department A to a different employer, and getting their managers around, can we all kind of work together here? Let's see if we can keep Mike in the company. That's a bigger win. So are you seeing companies that are doing things like that where it doesn't just look like this straight shot, but it's got it's okay to move sideways twice in order to go up?
Yeah, I'm working with a third-party logistics company right now, and this is, with third-party logistics, you only have maybe 3 or 4 management positions at each location. Well, they have 18, 20 locations, and so they're really they see a real opportunity to get people moved and getting them different experience. Just hey, we're having a problem. The one like stretch assignment at this company that's coveted is when an issue comes up or a new facility's getting built, they're sending their hourly employees to experience the other locations. And it's a pain for HR folks, as you guys know, that travel and keep track of time cards as you had. It is a huge pain, but it's a great engagement builder for the team. And then also they're in the same boat of like, hey, we need some more hands to be raised in this frontline leadership role. So who's going to be the safety champion and that type of thing? And they're leveraging I would say not even job titles, job responsibilities, almost in a way that we traditionally would do in a career ladder. And for those of you at smaller companies, I think you can move those bullet points and totally change someone's job. And the other thing that I've been preaching is, if you don't tell them where they're if you're not there helping them tell them where to go, their neighbor's going to tell them, and their neighbor has the best job and best benefits, and they only tell them the good part about the job, or someone in their sphere is going to tell them about other jobs. So it's incumbent upon us to fill in that blank space with something, with a template.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm seeing the same. I mean, very, very similar. I think traditionally or more typically we've seen those kind of cross-functional training programs and a management development program. But I'm working with companies that are doing that right off the bat during their first 60 days of entry. It's like, so HVAC distribution is where I've worked with a lot of distributors and worked for them too. And it's having, like, let's say you hire somebody out of that corporate office. Well, have them go spend a couple days at a branch and see what the shadow warehouse driver, go along with the truck driver on their route, go work with a counter person at the storefront. It's helping them understand that, again, the decisions that are made at the corporate office, how it affects customers. I'm even seeing who are the customers that we serve, internally or externally. Same thing is for, you talked about people going on different kind of field trips, I'll call it, right?
Yeah, that's good.
But we had that as well, when we'd have like a branch move. Okay, well, what's the closest branch to that one? Well, let's have some guys come along for the ride, help move things, see what goes into a branch move, because it gives them a little bit more of exposure to what happens with the operations side of things, and just for them to get that exposure that they would normally get, because we get so used to our view of the world being this big, and so it opens them up going, oh, this is what it looks like outside of the walls of my office, my store, my whatever their kind of office view is. That's been super helpful, and something that you don't have to just do for those that are high potentials. It's that exposure to the entire view, the bigger picture view that you can paint for the employees, so that they don't think that they just have the traditional ladder and I'm in a store and I can go from there to store manager. Well, you don't have to. You could do inside sales, outside sales. There's a variety of paths.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I got a specific example. Bringing it back to that 9 block, there was somebody who worked for me about 10 years ago that I thought was a solid performer, really good, and never in a million years did I think she was an HR generalist. And we had her pegged in that block. And fast forward, I'm now working with her as she's a potential customer of mine. And she's an HR, she might be a senior director or director level HR manager of a major corporation that you all probably know about. And I was like, hey, let's say her name was Mary. I was like, Mary, I'm like, how did this, I don't mean to offend you, but I never pegged you there. And we had this big, long discussion, and she wasn't offended, luckily, because I'm trying to sell to her. But we talked about this, and she had done a startup. So she went from big corporate America at Caterpillar to a startup facility in automotive. And she's like, I was on the floor helping quality. Mm-hmm. I was in the office helping close books. I was helping the general manager bring on visitors. And she started describing all the career lattice. So she interviewed at this big company. They brought her in. Within like 3 months, they promoted her twice. Maybe it was a year. They promoted her twice. And I think it goes to say that this opportunity of just filling in as many roles and having people raise their hand outside of their comfort zone, bring it back to that 9 block, she would never had that opportunity if she wouldn't have done the lattice approach.
The other part is the culture needs to be ready for it, though, too. Because I've had that experience where you put people in like a rotation of different functional areas, and they go, well, why is HR here? Well, maybe she's in HR right now, but maybe she has other career aspirations. And so, like, that needs to be a conversation at the leadership level and beneath to say, this is part of what we do. We're all understanding what other people, because I've seen it and experienced it, where this is a good thing for all of you, just, and that's also on the person to kind of give them a little bit of coaching ahead of time. I mean, I've gone into a store where I was home office coming in, and I'm like, I'm not here to critique you. I don't have pink slips with me, I promise. I'm going to be like a 5-year-old, though, asking you questions of why, just so I can understand your world. It's not to be critical, it's to truly to learn. And I think that mindset is something that needs to happen in and around any sort of program or culture that this takes place in, is that we're a learning culture, we're a learning company. This is nothing about defending territories or getting, weird about it. This is greater good stuff we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you both very much. Could we have a round of applause from the house here? Truth be told, we had some people that were going to do this, and it didn't quite work out. And I think you found out 30 minutes ago, and you found out like 15 minutes ago. They both stepped in, so very much appreciate the knowledge that you brought to this, and thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Report Plus Thrive podcast. Stay connected for more exclusive insights directly from our MRA members. Check out the show notes for valuable resources on today's topics. If you have questions or want to learn more about MRA, find my contact information in the show notes or check out www.mranet.org.